$15,000, cash. You take it, you forget what you saw, and we never have this conversation again." The words hung in the fluorescent-lit hallway of the Hillsborough County Courthouse, spoken with the casual confidence of a man who had made this offer before, many times before. The woman he was speaking to stood 5'6", wearing a faded navy blazer and carrying a leather bag with worn straps. She looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong building, someone insignificant, someone who would take the money and disappear. Preston Weil had made a career out of reading people. He had never been more wrong. What he did not know, what he could not possibly know, was that the small recording device in her bag had been activated the moment he approached, that every word he spoke was being captured in digital clarity, that the woman he had dismissed as a nobody had spent 12 years building cases against lawyers exactly like him, and that she had been watching him for 6 months. "You're very quiet." Preston tilted his head, studying her face. "Most people have questions. How will I get paid? When do I need to leave? What happens if I change my mind?" He smiled, the expression perfectly calibrated to project warmth. "I appreciate efficiency, but silence makes me nervous." Dalia Clover did not respond. She was counting seconds in her head, calculating how much more she needed. "The offer expires in 30 seconds. Preston's smile remained, but something shifted behind his eyes. "After that, I'll assume you're not interested in a financial arrangement, and I'll have to explore other options." 15 seconds. Dalia let the silence stretch. Her face revealed nothing. Not the adrenaline coursing through her veins, not the 12 years of training that had prepared her for this exact moment, not the knowledge that she was about to end his career. She simply stood there, a black woman in a faded blazer, and let him believe he was in control. 5 seconds. Preston stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive, something designed to project power and success. "Last chance," Dalia finally spoke. "I think I need to hear that offer one more time." Her voice was calm, measured. "Just to make sure I understand what you're proposing." Preston's smile widened. He thought he had won. He had no idea what was about to happen. If you want to know who this woman really is, like and subscribe so you don't miss the next part. 3 weeks earlier, Dalia Clover had arrived at the Hillsborough County Courthouse at 7:45 in the morning, exactly 15 minutes before the building officially opened. She carried the same worn leather bag, wore a similar faded blazer, and blended seamlessly into the stream of people waiting outside the security checkpoint. No one looked twice at her. That was the point. She had been doing this work for 12 years, investigating complaints against attorneys, building cases for the Florida Bar's disciplinary board, tracking down evidence of misconduct that other people preferred to ignore. In that time, she had learned that the most effective investigators were the ones nobody noticed. Dalia was very good at not being noticed. She passed through security, nodding politely to the guard, who barely glanced at her face before waving her through. The metal detector beeped once, her keys, her phone, the small voice recorder she always carried, and then she was inside. The courthouse smelled like every courthouse she had ever entered: industrial cleaner, old paper, and the particular staleness of recycled air. Dalia walked past the directory without checking it. She had memorized the building's layout 3 days ago. Courtroom 4B was on the second floor, accessible by a stairwell that most people ignored in favor of the elevators. Dalia took the stairs. It gave her time to think. The case that had brought her here was straightforward, at least on paper. A complaint had been filed 6 months ago by a woman named Vera Simmons, whose son had been convicted of armed robbery in a trial that lasted exactly 2 days. According to Vera, her son's defense attorney, a man named Preston Weil, had done almost nothing to prepare for trial. He had missed filing deadlines, failed to interview witnesses, and shown up to court visibly distracted. When Vera had confronted him, Preston had smiled and assured her that everything was under control. Her son was now serving 15 years. The bar had received the complaint and assigned it to the standard review process, a process that, in Dalia's experience, was designed more to protect attorneys than to discipline them. Complaints were investigated slowly. Evidence was evaluated charitably. Attorneys received the benefit of every possible doubt. In most cases, that was where the story ended. But Vera Simmons was persistent. She had written follow-up letters. She had called the bar's complaint line so many times that the receptionist knew her by voice. She had gathered her own evidence, court transcripts, missed deadlines, emails that Preston had ignored, and submitted it in thick manila envelopes that arrived every 2 weeks like clockwork. And buried in one of those envelopes, Dalia had found something that changed everything. A copy of a bank statement. Vera's bank statement, showing a deposit of $8,000 made 3 days before her son's trial. The memo line read, "Legal consultation fee." Vera had not paid Preston Weil $8,000 for consultation. Someone else had paid her that money. And Dalia had a very good idea why. She reached the second floor and paused at the door to the stairwell, pulling out her small leather notebook and pretending to check something inside. In reality, she was watching the hallway through the window in the door, cataloging the people moving past. A young woman in a crisp suit, walking fast, carrying a tablet, probably a paralegal. 2 men in rumpled blazers, laughing about something. Public defenders, based on the exhaustion in their eyes. A security guard, large, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and the expression that suggested he enjoyed his job a little too much. Dalia noted his badge number without appearing to look at it. And there, at the end of the hallway, standing outside courtroom 4B, with his back perfectly straight and his silver hair immaculately styled, was Preston Weil. He was talking to someone. A woman, older, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Dalia's monthly rent. Their heads were close together, and Preston's hand rested on the woman's arm with practiced familiarity. Dalia opened her notebook and wrote 3 words. Margot Hargrove, present. Then she opened the door and walked into the hallway, just another unremarkable person in a building full of unremarkable people. The morning proceeded exactly as Dalia had expected. Courtroom 4B was hearing motions, dry procedural arguments about evidence deadlines, and witness availability that made half the gallery fall asleep. Dalia took a seat in the back row, behind a family who appeared to be there for emotional support, and a man in paint-stained jeans who was probably waiting for his own case. Preston Weil was magnificent. Not in a good way, in the way that a predator is magnificent when it hunts. He moved through the courtroom with absolute confidence, his voice modulated perfectly for each audience. Respectful with the judge, dismissive with opposing counsel. Warm with the jury. There was no jury present, but Preston performed as if there were, every gesture calculated for an audience that existed only in his mind. Dalia watched him argue a motion to suppress evidence, his hands moving expressively as he cited case law from memory. The motion was denied, but Preston showed no frustration. He simply nodded, thanked the court, and returned to his seat as if the outcome had been exactly what he expected. She wrote in her notebook, "Performance, not substance." At 11:15, the court took a 15-minute recess. Dalia remained in her seat, pretending to read something on her phone while she tracked Preston's movements through her peripheral vision. He spoke briefly with the judge, Judge Roland Sutter, according to the nameplate, in a way that suggested familiarity. Golf buddies, maybe, or members of the same country club. The kind of relationship that made disciplinary complaints disappear. Then he stepped into the hallway, and Dalia followed. The courthouse was crowded during recess. Lawyers, witnesses, families, all compressed into narrow corridors designed for a different era. Dalia kept Preston in sight while maintaining enough distance that she appeared to be going somewhere else entirely. He stopped at a water fountain, checked his phone, started walking again. Dalia matched his pace. They passed a row of vending machines, a fire extinguisher behind scratched glass, a bulletin board covered in public notices that no one ever read. Preston turned left, heading toward a corridor that led to the private meeting rooms, and then he stopped. A young man was waiting for him, early 20s, nervous, wearing clothes that looked borrowed from someone larger. His hands were shaking slightly, and his eyes kept darting toward the main hallway as if he expected someone to appear. "Marcus?" Preston's voice shifted, becoming warmer. "Right on time. I appreciate that." Dalia slowed her pace. There was a water fountain nearby, one that gave her a clear view of the conversation while appearing completely uninterested in it. "I don't know if I can do this." The young man, Marcus, kept his voice low. "What you're asking me to say, it's not true." "It's not about truth, Marcus." Preston stepped closer, dropping his own voice. "It's about memory. Memory is unreliable. Everyone knows that. All I'm asking is for you to remember things slightly differently." "But I saw what happened. I was there. He didn't have a weapon." Preston placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. The gesture looked supportive, fatherly even. But Dalia could see the way his fingers pressed into the fabric, just enough to communicate pressure. "What you think you saw," Preston said carefully, "and what you actually saw might be two different things. The lighting was bad. It happened fast. You were scared. Those things affect perception." "I wasn't scared. I was—" "Marcus." Preston's voice hardened slightly. "I've been doing this for 20 years. I know how these things work. You get on that stand and say what you think you remember, and the prosecutor will tear you apart. She'll make you look like a liar. She'll make you look like you're trying to help a guilty man go free." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I'm just trying to tell the truth." "The truth is complicated. That's what juries don't understand." Preston leaned closer. "But you know what's not complicated? $10,000. Tax-free. Deposited into any account you want, from a source that no one will ever trace." Dalia's hand moved slowly, casually, reaching into her bag. I don't know." Marcus looked physically ill. "It sounds like compensation for the trauma you've experienced, for the time you're taking off work, for the stress of being involved in a legal matter." Preston smiled. "Completely legitimate. I do it for witnesses all the time." Dalia pressed the record button on her device. "Think about it." Preston released Marcus's shoulder and stepped back. "The prosecutor calls you tomorrow morning. You have until then to decide whether you want to tell a story that helps no one, or tell a story that helps everyone, including yourself." He straightened his tie and walked away. Marcus stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the floor. Then he turned and walked in the opposite direction, his shoulders hunched as if carrying a physical weight. Dalia waited until both men had disappeared. Then she pulled out her notebook and wrote rapidly, documenting everything she had heard. The time, the location, the exact words Preston had used. Florida Bar Rule 4, 3.4, she thought. Obstructing access to evidence, tampering with a witness, and potentially 18 U.S.C. Section 201, B, 3. Federal bribery of a witness in a legal proceeding. She had been building a case against Preston Weil for 6 months. She had just found her foundation. The afternoon brought complications. Dalia had planned to observe Preston's afternoon court session, but when she returned to Courtroom 4B, she found the doors closed and a sign posted, "Hearing continued until tomorrow." She checked her phone. No notifications from the bar. No messages from her supervisor. Nothing to explain the sudden schedule change. She made her way back to the main corridor, moving against the flow of people heading toward the exits. The building would close in 2 hours, and most of the day's business was already concluded. "Excuse me." The voice came from behind her. Dalia turned to find the security guard she had noticed earlier, the one with the shaved head and the expression of someone who enjoyed his authority. "Can I help you?" She kept her voice pleasant, unremarkable. "I noticed you earlier." The guard, his name tag read Boone, stepped closer than necessary. "Sitting in that courtroom all morning, not talking to anyone, just watching." "I was observing the proceedings." "It's a public courtroom." "Sure." Boone smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "It's just interesting, that's all. Most people who sit in court are waiting for their own case or supporting someone. You didn't seem to be doing either. Dalia measured the distance between them. Boone was at least 6 inches taller than her and probably 70 pounds heavier. If this conversation went wrong, she would not win a physical confrontation. I'm interested in the legal system. She kept her voice neutral. I like to watch how it works. That's so. Boone's eyes moved slowly down her body, not sexually, but assessingly, like he was calculating what she might be carrying, what threat she might represent. You a journalist or something? Or something. Boone's smile widened. See, that's not really an answer, and I don't like non-answers. Makes me think people are hiding things. I'm not hiding anything. Dalia adjusted her bag on her shoulder, ensuring the strap was secure. I'm just a private citizen exercising my right to observe public court proceedings. That's not illegal. Never said it was. Boone stepped even closer, close enough that Dalia could smell cigarette smoke on his uniform. I'm just saying it's noticed. People who watch lawyers, that gets noticed. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Boone reached out and flicked the strap of Dalia's bag with one thick finger. Nice bag. Looks like it's got a lot of stuff in it. Notebooks, maybe. Recording devices. Things that aren't allowed in certain parts of the building. I passed through security. Everything I'm carrying is legal. For the public areas, sure. Boone leaned in. But you start wandering into the wrong places, carrying the wrong equipment. That's a different story. Dalia held his gaze. She had faced worse intimidation than this, men who were smarter, men who were more powerful, men who had real authority instead of borrowed uniforms and inflated egos. But she also knew when to retreat. I appreciate the information. She stepped back, breaking the proximity he had established. I'll make sure to stay in the public areas. You do that. Boone's eyes followed her as she turned away. I'll be watching. Dalia walked toward the exit without looking back. Her heart was beating faster than she wanted to admit, but her face remained calm, unremarkable. She had been doing this for 12 years. She knew how to handle men like Tyrell Boone, but she also knew that his interest was not random. Someone had told him to watch for people who watched Preston Weil, which meant Preston was being protected, and which meant this case was going to be much harder than she had anticipated. The next morning, Dalia arrived at the courthouse at 7:30. She had spent the previous evening reviewing her files, reorganizing her notes, and preparing for the different scenarios she might encounter. The recording of Preston's conversation with Marcus was secure, backed up to 3 different locations, documented with timestamps and chain of custody notes that would hold up under any scrutiny. But one recording was not enough. Florida Bar Rule 4.8.4 required proof of a pattern of misconduct. Isolated incidents could be explained away, dismissed as misunderstandings, buried under the weight of Preston's reputation and connections. To build a case that would actually result in discipline, Dalia needed more. She needed Preston to make another mistake, and she was going to give him the opportunity. The courthouse was quieter this early, most of the day's business not yet begun. Dalia passed through security without incident. Tyrell Boone was not at his post, replaced by an older woman who checked badges with mechanical efficiency and made her way to the second floor. Courtroom 4B was still closed, but the hallway outside was beginning to fill with the morning's participants. Dalia recognized several faces from the previous day: the paralegal in the crisp suit, the exhausted public defenders, a prosecutor with steel-gray hair who carried herself like someone who had stopped believing in surprises. And there, standing at the end of the corridor, was a face she had not expected. Margot Hargrove. The woman from yesterday, Preston's partner, according to the firm's website, was engaged in conversation with a court clerk. Her posture suggested irritation, her gestures sharp and controlled. Whatever she was discussing, she was not happy about it. Dalia found a seat on a bench near the water fountains, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid attention. She pulled out her notebook and pretended to review her notes. The conversation ended. Margot turned away from the clerk, her expression smoothing into professional neutrality, and began walking down the corridor, directly toward Dalia. For a moment, their eyes met. Margot's gaze was assessing, quick, sharp, professional. The look of someone who cataloged information automatically, who evaluated threats and opportunities with every glance. Then her attention moved on, and she walked past without a word. Dalia exhaled slowly. She had not been made. Margot had looked at her the same way she looked at everyone, as furniture, as background, as someone who did not matter. That was exactly what Dalia needed. The morning's hearing was a preliminary matter, arguments about evidence admissibility in a case involving embezzlement. Preston was not the lead attorney, but he sat at the defense table, whispering occasionally to his younger colleagues and watching the proceedings with apparent disinterest. Dalia sat in her usual spot in the back row, observing. At 10:45, the judge called a recess. Preston rose immediately, pulling out his phone and stepping into the hallway with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Dalia waited 30 seconds, then followed. The corridor was crowded again, but Preston's silver hair made him easy to track. He moved toward the same hallway as yesterday, the one leading to the private meeting rooms, but instead of stopping, he continued through a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Dalia hesitated. Following him through that door would be risky. If Tyrell Boone was watching, if anyone noticed, it would draw exactly the kind of attention she was trying to avoid. But there was another option. She had studied the building's layout. The authorized corridor connected to the main hallway through a secondary passage near the stairwell, a route that was technically public, if rarely used. Dalia turned and walked the other direction, moving quickly but not rushing, past the vending machines, past the fire extinguisher, through a door that led to a quiet section of the building that most visitors never saw. The secondary corridor was empty. She moved silently, her worn shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor. Ahead she could hear voices, muffled but audible. "Can't keep doing this." A woman's voice, sharp, familiar. "We don't have a choice." Preston's voice, calmer but edged with something that might have been frustration. "The bar complaint is still active. If they start pulling records, then we handle it the way we always handle it." Margot. The voice was definitely Margot's. "Judge Sutter owes you. Half the prosecutors in this building owe you. You've been doing this for 20 years, Preston. You know how to make problems disappear. This is different." "How is it different?" A pause. Dalia pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear. "Because someone's watching." Preston's voice dropped. "I can feel it. Someone in that courtroom. Someone who shouldn't be there. I've asked Tyrell to keep an eye out, but—" "Tyrell is a blunt instrument." Margot's tone was dismissive. "If you want surveillance, hire a professional." "I don't want surveillance. I want to know who filed the complaint that won't go away. The bar keeps sending requests for documentation. They're asking about the Simmons case specifically." Vera Simmons is a grieving mother. Her complaints are emotional, not evidentiary. No one takes them seriously. Then why does the bar keep asking questions? Another pause. Longer this time. "What do you want me to do?" Margot asked finally. "Find out who's handling the investigation. You have contacts at the bar. Use them." "And if I find out it's someone persistent?" Preston's response was too quiet to hear. Dalia leaned closer, and her bag caught the edge of a fire extinguisher case. The sound was small, barely audible. But the conversation stopped. Dalia moved immediately, turning and walking back the way she had come. Her heart was pounding, but her pace remained steady. Not running, not hurrying, just walking. She reached the main corridor and merged into the flow of people returning from recess. 15 seconds later, she was back in courtroom 4B, sitting in her usual seat in the back row. No one followed her. No one seemed to notice. But as the judge resumed the hearing and the attorneys returned to their positions, Dalia saw Margot Hargrove enter the courtroom and take a seat near the front. And for just a moment, just a single, fleeting second, Margot's eyes found Dalia's. The expression on her face was not recognition. It was calculation. Ko Chuyen Dang Den Duan Kung Tang Yit. Like video va comment. Chatoy Biet, Ban Ngi Ngui Fu Nu Ne Tuk Su La Ai. The rest of the morning passed without incident. Dalia forced herself to remain in her seat through the entire session, watching proceedings that no longer interested her. Preston argued a motion. The judge ruled against him. Margot left early, her heels clicking sharply against the courtroom floor. At 12:30, the court broke for lunch. Dalia gathered her things and walked toward the exit, blending into the crowd of people flooding the corridor. Her mind was racing. Margot had seen her, Margot had noticed her, and whatever protection Preston had arranged was about to extend in her direction. She needed to accelerate her timeline. She was halfway to the stairwell when a hand closed around her arm. "Hey." Dalia turned. Tyrell Boone was standing behind her, his grip firm enough to bruise. "Mr. Boone." She kept her voice calm. "Is there a problem?" "You tell me." He pulled her closer, lowering his voice. "I told you yesterday to stay in the public areas, but I heard something interesting this morning. Someone saw a woman matching your description near the restricted corridor." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." Boone's grip tightened. "Here's the thing. I don't like liars, and I really don't like people who think they're smarter than me. Let go of my arm." "Or what?" Boone smiled. "You're going to file a complaint? Call a cop? Lady, I am the cop in this building. What happens here is what I say happens." Dalia held his gaze. Her arm was starting to ache, but she refused to show pain. "You're making a mistake." "Am I?" Boone leaned closer. "See, here's what I think. I think you're some kind of investigator. Private, maybe. Or one of those journalist types who thinks she's going to break a story. Either way, you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." "And what if I am?" Something flickered in Boone's eyes, surprise maybe at her refusal to back down. "Then you're going to find out what happens to people who stick their noses where they don't belong." He released her arm suddenly, and Dalia stumbled slightly before catching herself. "This is your warning. Don't come back." Dalia rubbed her arm where his fingers had pressed. She could already feel the bruises forming. "I'll go wherever the law allows me to go." She straightened her bag on her shoulder. "And you touching me without consent? That's battery under Florida Statute 784.03. You might want to remember that." Boone's smile disappeared. "Walk away," he said quietly, "while you still can." Dalia turned and walked toward the exit. She did not look back, but she could feel his eyes following her all the way to the door. That evening, Dalia sat in her apartment reviewing her notes. The day had been productive, more productive than she had anticipated, despite the complications. She had confirmed that Preston and Margot were coordinating their responses to the bar investigation. She had documented Tyrell Boone's involvement as security, and she had established that they were actively looking for whoever was watching them. They just didn't know it was her. Yet, her apartment was small and functional, a one-bedroom in a complex that catered to people who valued privacy over amenities. The walls were thin, the appliances were old, and the view was a parking lot. But the rent was reasonable, and nobody asked questions. Dalia spread her files across the kitchen table. 6 months of documentation, complaint letters from Vera Simmons, court transcripts from her son's trial, financial records that didn't quite add up. And now, recordings. The case against Preston Weil was beginning to take shape. But it wasn't enough. The Florida bar's disciplinary process was designed to give attorneys the benefit of the doubt. Even with evidence of witness tampering, even with recordings of bribery attempts, Preston would have access to resources that most defendants never saw. Private investigators who could discredit witnesses, attorneys who could challenge every piece of evidence, connections who could delay proceedings indefinitely. Dalia needed something more. She needed Preston to make a mistake so catastrophic that not even his friends could save him. and she was beginning to understand how to make that happen. Her phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. "Careful, people are asking about you." Dalia stared at the message for a long moment. Then she blocked the number and returned to her files. The next 3 days followed a pattern. Dalia continued her surveillance, varying her appearance and timing to avoid recognition. She wore different blazers, different bags. She arrived at different times, sat in different sections of the courtroom. She became a ghost, present but invisible, noticed but never remembered. Preston continued his performances. She watched him argue motions with theatrical precision, charm judges with practiced ease, and mentor young attorneys with the kind of attention that suggested genuine investment in their careers. To anyone watching, and everyone was watching, he was exactly what a successful attorney should be: confident, capable, connected. But Dalia saw what they didn't see. The private meetings with witnesses who left looking shaken, the whispered conversations with Margot that ended abruptly when anyone approached, the way his eyes constantly scanned the courtroom, looking for something or someone he couldn't quite identify. He was nervous, and nervous people made mistakes. On Thursday afternoon, Dalia found her opening. She was sitting in her usual position, back row, near the exit, invisible, when she noticed a young woman enter the courtroom and take a seat near the front. The woman was dressed professionally but simply, in clothes that suggested a junior position at a firm that couldn't afford better. Cassidy Vance. Dalia recognized the name from her research. Preston's paralegal, young, ambitious, and, according to several anonymous tips that had crossed Dalia's desk, willing to do whatever it took to advance her career, including things that were professionally questionable. Cassidy spent most of the hearing on her tablet, taking notes that seemed more comprehensive than the proceedings required. But twice, exactly twice, she looked up and scanned the gallery. Both times her gaze lingered on Dalia, not with Margot's calculating assessment, not with Tyrell's open hostility, with curiosity, as if she was trying to figure out where she had seen Dalia before. Dalia kept her face neutral, unremarkable, forgettable, but she made a note in her notebook. Vance, watching, possible exposure risk. The exposure came faster than she anticipated. Friday morning, Dalia arrived at the courthouse to find Tyrell Boone waiting at the security checkpoint. Not behind the checkpoint, in front of it, standing with his arms crossed and a satisfied expression on his face. "Morning," he smiled. "Fancy seeing you here again, despite my suggestion that you find somewhere else to be." "I have every right to be here." "Sure you do." Boone stepped closer. "But here's the thing. I did a little checking, asked some people some questions, and guess what I found out?" Dalia waited. "Nothing." Boone's smile widened. "Absolutely nothing. You're not a journalist. I called every outlet in town. You're not a lawyer. I checked the bar directory. You're not family to anyone currently in proceedings. I went through the dockets." "That must have taken a lot of time." "It did." Boone leaned in. "Which makes me wonder, who are you really? What's so important that you've been sitting in that courtroom for a week, watching people who have no idea you exist? Maybe I just find the legal system fascinating. Maybe." Boone's voice dropped. "Or maybe you're something else entirely. Something that certain people would be very interested to know about." For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then Boone reached out and tapped the security scanner beside them. "Go ahead." He gestured toward the checkpoint. "You've got every right to be here, just like I've got every right to tell certain people that there's a mystery woman who won't go away." Dalia walked through security without responding, but she knew with absolute certainty that her cover was beginning to crack. The confrontation came at 11:43. Dalia was walking toward the water fountain when she heard footsteps behind her. Fast, purposeful, angry. "Hey." She turned. Cassidy Vance was standing 3 feet away, her face flushed and her tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. "You need to stop." Dalia tilted her head slightly. "Stop what?" "Whatever you're doing, following Mr. Weil. sitting in his courtroom, recording things on that device in your bag. Cassidy's voice shook slightly, but her eyes were hard. I know you're investigating him. I don't know who sent you, but you need to stop. I'm not sure what you think you know. I know that Vera Simmons filed a complaint with the Florida bar. I know that someone's been calling witnesses, asking questions about cases Mr. Weil handled. And I know that you appeared in his courtroom exactly 1 week after those calls started. Dalia said nothing. I'm not stupid, Cassidy stepped closer. I worked 80 hours a week to get where I am. I'm not going to let some nobody destroy everything I've built because she thinks she found a scandal. Is that what you think this is? A scandal hunt? I think you don't understand what you're dealing with. Cassidy's voice dropped. Preston Weil has connections that go all the way to the state capitol. Judge Sutter? They've known each other for 30 years. The DA? Preston helped get her elected. You come after him, you're coming after everyone. And that's supposed to stop me. Something flickered across Cassidy's face. Not quite fear. Something closer to confusion. Who are you? Dalia smiled, the first genuine expression she had allowed herself in days. Someone who doesn't scare easily. She turned and walked away, walked. Behind her, she could hear Cassidy already pulling out her phone. The escalation came 2 hours later. Dalia was leaving the courthouse, walking toward the parking garage, keeping her pace steady and her awareness high, when she saw the 3 figures waiting near her car. Tyrell Boone, Cassidy Vance, and a third person she didn't immediately recognize, Margot Hargrove. Ms. Clover? Dalia stopped. The use of her name, her real name, sent a cold shock through her system. I'm sorry? She kept her voice neutral. I think you have me confused with someone else. No? I don't think I do. Margot stepped forward, her heels clicking against the concrete. Dalia Clover, employed by the Florida Bar's Office of Lawyer Regulation. 12 years of service, specializing in investigations of attorney misconduct. So much for cover. You've been busy. Dalia shifted her stance slightly, putting the concrete pillar to her left and the exit to her right. I'm impressed. You shouldn't be. Once Cassidy noticed you, the rest was simple research. Margot's smile was cold. What's remarkable is that you thought you could conduct an undercover investigation in a building full of lawyers without anyone noticing. Clearly, I underestimated you. Yes. Margot's smile didn't waver. You did. Tyrell moved first. He grabbed Dalia's arm, the same arm he had grabbed before, in the same place, and twisted it behind her back. The pain was immediate and intense, shooting from her wrist to her shoulder. Here's what's going to happen. Margot stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You're going to walk away from this investigation. You're going to tell your supervisor that you found nothing actionable, and you're going to forget that any of this ever happened. And if I don't? Then things will become very uncomfortable for you. Margot's eyes were flat, empty. We know where you live. We know your routines. We know that you have no family in the area, no close friends, and no one who would notice if you simply disappeared. Dalia's arm was screaming with pain. Tyrell's grip was relentless, professionally applied, the grip of someone who had hurt people before and knew exactly how much pressure to use. You're threatening a state investigator. Dalia kept her voice steady despite the pain. In front of witnesses, on courthouse property. There are no witnesses. Cassidy's voice was nervous but determined. The security cameras in this section don't work, haven't worked in months. And you're not a state investigator right now. Margot reached out and took Dalia's bag from her shoulder. Right now, you're just a woman who wandered into the wrong parking garage and had an unfortunate accident. She reached into the bag and pulled out the small recording device. Interesting. Margot examined the device with clinical detachment. I assume this contains evidence you were planning to use against Preston? Dalia said nothing. Delete it. Margot held out the device. "While I watch." "That's destruction of evidence. You'll be charged with obstruction." "Charged by whom?" Margot laughed. A cold, brief sound. "The bar? The same bar where Preston has friends in every department, the prosecutor's office? Where Preston has donated to every campaign for the past 20 years? She leaned closer. "You have no power here. The sooner you understand that, the easier this will be." Tyrell twisted Dalia's arm another quarter inch. The pain was blinding now, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. "Delete it," Margot repeated. Dalia closed her eyes. She thought about the case she had built. 6 months of documentation, witness testimonies, financial records, the recording of Preston offering $10,000 to Marcus. All of it was backed up. All of it was secure. But Margot didn't know that. "Fine." Dalia's voice was barely a whisper. "Give me the device." Margot handed it over. Cassidy watched with wide eyes. Tyrell's grip loosened slightly, just enough for Dalia to manipulate the device with her free hand. She pressed 3 buttons in sequence. "It's done." She dropped the device on the concrete. "Are we finished here?" Margot studied her face for a long moment, looking for deception, looking for defiance. She found neither. "We're finished." She nodded at Tyrell, who released Dalia's arm with a final twist that made her gasp. "But understand this. If you come back, if you continue this investigation, if you do anything to threaten Preston or this firm, we will destroy you. Not just your career, you." Dalia retrieved her bag from the concrete where Margot had dropped it. Her arm was throbbing, her hands were shaking, and every instinct she had was screaming at her to run. Instead, she straightened her blazer and looked Margot directly in the eyes. "Thank you for clarifying where you stand." Then she walked to her car, started the engine, and drove away. In the parking garage, Margot watched the taillights disappear around the corner. "That was too easy." Cassidy's voice was uncertain. "She gave up too easily." "She's an investigator, not a soldier." Margot dismissed the concern with a wave of her hand. "She knows when she's beaten." "I don't know." Tyrell rubbed his knuckles. "She didn't seem scared. She seemed patient." Margot frowned. For a moment, she considered the possibility that they had made a mistake, that Dalia Clover was not the defeated investigator she appeared to be, that somewhere, backed up to a secure server or hidden in a safety deposit box, were copies of everything she had collected. Then she shook her head. "It doesn't matter." She started walking toward the elevator. "Even if she has copies, she has no credibility now. We have 3 witnesses who will testify that she deleted evidence voluntarily, that she accepted compensation to walk away, that she compromised her own investigation." "Did she accept compensation?" Cassidy asked. "I didn't see—" "She will." Margot pressed the elevator button. "By the time this is over, there will be bank records showing deposits into her account, emails showing her requesting payments, a paper trail that proves she was never investigating Preston, she was extorting him." The elevator doors opened. "That's illegal." Cassidy's voice was quiet, almost scared. "Welcome to the real practice of law." Margot stepped into the elevator. "Are you coming, or are you too squeamish to see this through?" Cassidy hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Then she followed. Dalia drove for 30 minutes before pulling into a rest stop on I-75. Her arm was swelling visibly now, the bruises already turning purple under her skin. Her hands were still shaking. Her breath was coming in short, sharp gasps that she couldn't quite control. She sat in the car for 5 minutes, forcing herself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The technique she had learned years ago when she first started this work and realized that the people she investigated would not always respond well to being investigated. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Not the phone that Margot had seen. A different phone. A backup that she kept hidden in a zippered pocket that most people never noticed. She dialed a number from memory. "This is Clover." Her voice was steady now, professional. "I need to report an incident." The person on the other end listened without interrupting. "Yes, I'm certain. They made contact in the parking garage. Physical intimidation, threats, demand that I delete evidence." Dalia paused. "They believe they successfully coerced me. They're planning to fabricate evidence of misconduct on my part, bank records, emails, a paper trail showing extortion." Another pause. "I have backups of everything, multiple locations. The recording device they made me delete was a decoy. I transferred the actual files this morning." Dalia closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of exhaustion. "But they have a security guard on their payroll. They have connections to Judge Sutter, and they're planning to destroy my credibility before I can present my findings." The voice on the other end asked a question. "What do I need?" Dalia opened her eyes and stared at the highway traffic streaming past. "I need Preston Weil to make his offer to me directly, on record, in a location where they can't claim the recording was fabricated." Another question. "How do I plan to make that happen?" Dalia smiled, a small, grim expression that no one else could see. "By giving them exactly what they want, a scared investigator who's ready to make a deal." She ended the call and sat in silence for a long moment. Then she started the car and drove toward home. Tomorrow, she would return to the courthouse, and Preston Weil would have no idea what was about to hit him. The weekend passed slowly. Dalia used the time to prepare. She documented her injuries, photographs of the bruises, a written account of the assault, medical records from the urgent care clinic where she had her arm examined and wrapped. All of it went into her files, alongside the recordings and the financial records, and the witness statements she had already collected. She also made preparations that were less visible. A meeting with her supervisor at the bar, conducted in a secure location. A conversation with the FBI field office in Tampa regarding potential federal charges. A careful review of Florida's wiretapping statutes, Section 934.03, which allowed one-party consent to recordings, to ensure that every piece of evidence she collected would be admissible. By Sunday evening, she was ready. Monday morning, she arrived at the courthouse at 8:15. The building was quiet. Most of the day's business hadn't yet begun, and Dalia moved through the corridors with deliberate visibility. She wanted to be seen. She wanted word to reach Margot and Preston that the scared investigator they had threatened was back. She wanted them to think they had won. She found a seat in the main lobby, near the directory, and pulled out her phone. For anyone watching, she looked like a woman checking her messages. In reality, she was monitoring the hallways through the reflection in the phone's dark screen. At 8:47, Tyrell Boone appeared. He saw her immediately. She could tell from the way his body language shifted, the slight straightening of his spine. But he didn't approach. Instead, he pulled out his own phone and sent a message. 3 minutes later, Cassidy Vance emerged from the elevator. She walked toward Dalia with careful steps, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "Miss Clover." Dalia looked up. "Ms. Vance." "Mr. Weil would like to speak with you." Cassidy's voice was quiet. "Privately, about the matter we discussed on Friday." "The matter where your colleagues assaulted me and threatened my life?" Cassidy flinched. "That's not how I would characterize it." "How would you characterize it?" "A misunderstanding." Cassidy glanced toward Tyrell, who was watching from across the lobby. "One that Mr. Weil would like to resolve. Amicably." Dalia pretended to consider. "Where?" "Conference room 3B, 3rd floor. It's private." "I'm sure it is." Cassidy shifted uncomfortably. "Are you coming or not?" Dalia rose from her seat, shouldered her bag, and smiled. "Lead the way." Conference room 3B was exactly what Dalia expected. Windowless, soundproofed, and equipped with electronic jamming devices that would block most surveillance equipment. Fortunately, her equipment wasn't most surveillance equipment. Preston Weil was already seated at the head of the long table, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his expression radiating warmth. Margot stood behind him, near the door, her face unreadable. "Ms. Clover." Preston rose and extended his hand. "I want to start by apologizing for the unpleasantness on Friday. My colleagues were overzealous in their protection of my interests." Dalia didn't take his hand. "Your colleagues committed battery and made death threats. Unfortunate. Truly unfortunate." Preston withdrew his hand smoothly, showing no offense. "But I think you'll find that there's no evidence of any such incident. The security footage in that section was malfunctioning, and my colleagues remember the conversation rather differently than you do." "I'm sure they do. Please." Preston gestured to a chair. "Sit. Let's discuss how we might resolve this situation in a way that benefits everyone." Dalia sat. She placed her bag on the table in front of her, carefully, deliberately, in a position where its contents would not be visible. "I'm listening." Preston smiled. The expression was warm, genuine, almost paternal. "I've done my research on you, Ms. Clover. You've been with the bar for 12 years. You've handled some significant cases, but you've never successfully prosecuted a partner at a major firm. Do you know why? I assume you're going to tell me. Because the system protects its own." Preston leaned forward. "You must have noticed by now. The bar's disciplinary process is designed to rehabilitate, not to punish. The burden of proof is overwhelming, and attorneys at my level, we have resources that most investigators never encounter. Are you trying to intimidate me again?" "Not at all." Preston held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm simply explaining the reality of your situation. You've spent 6 months building a case against me. You have recordings, financial records, witness statements, and none of it matters, because by the time this reaches a hearing, my attorneys will have challenged every piece of evidence, my connections will have ensured a sympathetic panel, and your own credibility will be compromised." Dalia said nothing. "Unless," Preston's voice dropped, "unless we come to an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "You walk away. You tell your supervisors that the investigation found nothing actionable. You take a well-deserved vacation somewhere pleasant, the Keys, perhaps, or somewhere further away." Preston smiled. "And in exchange, a consulting fee appears in your account. $30,000, tax-free, untraceable." The number hung in the air. Dalia let the silence stretch. 30,000. It's a generous offer. Preston's eyes were warm, friendly, completely sincere. Most investigators I've dealt with accepted much less. Most investigators you've dealt with? I've been doing this for 20 years, Ms. Clover. You're not the first person to think they could bring me down, and you won't be the last. Preston leaned back in his chair. But you could be the first to walk away with your career intact and money in your pocket. That's not nothing. Dalia reached for her bag. Margot's hand moved toward her pocket. Relax. Dalia pulled out her notebook, the same worn leather notebook she had been carrying all week. I just want to make sure I have the terms correct. Preston smiled. Of course. $30,000. I close the investigation. I take a vacation. Dalia wrote in her notebook, her pen moving slowly across the page. Anything else? Just your word that this conversation never happened. Dalia stopped writing. She looked at Preston for a long moment, at his warm smile, his perfect composure, his absolute confidence that he had won. Then she spoke. I think I need to hear that offer one more time, just to make sure I understand what you're proposing. Preston's smile widened. $15,000, cash. You take it, you forget what you saw, and we never have this conversation again. The words were identical to the ones he had spoken 2 weeks ago. The same offer, the same confidence, the same mistake. Dalia closed her notebook and placed her hands flat on the table. Thank you, Mr. Weil. That's exactly what I needed. Preston's smile flickered. What? I needed you to repeat the offer, on record, in your own words. Dalia reached into her bag and pulled out a small device, smaller than the one they had seen before, built into what looked like an ordinary pen. This conversation has been recorded. Every word, including your offer of $30,000 to obstruct a bar investigation." Preston's face went white. That's not admissible. You can't. Florida Statute 934.03. One-party consent. Dalia rose from her chair. "I'm the one party. This recording is completely legal." Margot moved toward the door. "I wouldn't do that." Dalia's voice was calm. "There are 2 FBI agents waiting in the hallway, along with my supervisor from the bar, and a reporter from the Tampa Bay Times who has been waiting 6 months for this story." The door opened. 2 men in dark suits stepped in, followed by a woman in a sharp blazer who Dalia recognized from their secure meeting over the weekend, and a man with a press credential hanging from his neck. "Preston Weil." The first FBI agent stepped forward. "You're under arrest for attempted bribery of a public official under 18 U.S.C. Section 201 and witness tampering under 18 U.S.C. Section 1512. You have the right to remain silent." Dalia stepped back as the agents moved past her. Preston's face was a mask of disbelief. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "This isn't over." Margot's voice was sharp, controlled, but there was a tremor beneath the surface. "We have lawyers. We have resources. You have no idea what you've started." Dalia looked at her directly. "I have 12 years of experience building cases against people who thought they were untouchable." She picked up her bag and walked toward the door. "And I'm just getting started." She stepped into the hallway, where the reporter was already taking notes and the bar supervisor was speaking quietly into her phone. Behind her, she could hear Preston Weil being read his rights. The case was finally moving forward. But Dalia knew, she had always known, that this was only the beginning. Preston had connections, resources, friends in high places who would do everything in their power to make this investigation disappear. The arrest was a victory, but the battle was just beginning. Nếu bạn muốn biết Preston Weil có thoát tội không, subscribe và bật chuông thông báo để xem phần 2. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of procedure. Preston Weil was processed at the federal courthouse. Fingerprints, photographs, the standard booking procedure that he had seen applied to hundreds of clients but never imagined experiencing himself. His bond hearing was scheduled for the following morning. Margot Hargrove was detained for questioning but not formally arrested, yet. The FBI agents made it clear that her cooperation would be noted, and her refusal to cooperate would be noted as well. Cassidy Vance disappeared. Dalia noticed her absence during the initial chaos and flagged it to her supervisor, but by the time anyone thought to look for her, she was gone. Her apartment was empty. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her car was found abandoned at the airport, but no flight records showed her name. She had prepared for this possibility, and that preparation suggested she knew things that hadn't yet come to light. Tyrell Boone was arrested separately on state charges of battery and obstruction. His union representative arrived within the hour, and his bail was posted by the end of the day. The system was already protecting its own. By 6 in the evening, Dalia was sitting in a conference room at the bar's offices in Tallahassee, reviewing her notes with her supervisor and the federal prosecutors who had joined the case. The recording is strong. Assistant U.S. Attorney Diana Vega tapped her pen against the transcript. Clear offer of bribery, clear mention of previous payments to witnesses. We can build a solid case for the federal charges. What about the state charges? Dalia's supervisor, a woman named Barbara Chen, looked up from her own notes. The Florida bar violation is the foundation here. If Preston's attorneys can delay the disciplinary proceeding, they will try. Diana's expression was grim. Preston has some of the best defense attorneys in the state. They'll file motions, challenge evidence, drag this out for years if they can. And Judge Sutter? Dalia asked. He's been mentioned repeatedly in connection to Preston. If he's involved, that's a separate investigation. Diana's voice was careful. Judicial misconduct falls under the Judicial Qualifications Commission. The FBI is aware of the concerns, but we don't have actionable evidence yet. So he stays on the bench. For now. Dalia looked at the transcript in front of her. 6 months of work, countless hours of surveillance, the physical assault in the parking garage, the threats, the moment when she had genuinely wondered if she would walk out of that building alive. And the result was a single arrest. One man, charged with crimes that his lawyers would spend years fighting. While his partners walked free, his connections remained intact, and the system he had corrupted continued to function. It's not enough. Diana looked at her with something like sympathy. It's a start. A start. Dalia closed the transcript. Meanwhile, Cassidy Vance is in the wind with God knows what evidence. Margot Hargrove is already coordinating with Preston's defense team. And somewhere in this building, there are bar officials who took calls from Preston's friends and decided that certain complaints didn't need to be investigated too closely. You don't know that. I've been doing this for 12 years. Dalia rose from her chair. I know exactly how this works. She gathered her files and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Barbara asked. Dalia paused at the threshold. To find Cassidy Vance. She ran because she knows something important enough that she was willing to abandon her entire life rather than answer questions about it. That's not your assignment. The FBI has jurisdictional constraints, coordination requirements, bureaucratic processes that will take weeks to navigate. Dalia looked back at her supervisor. I have none of those things. She walked out before anyone could stop her. The drive from Tallahassee to Tampa took 4 hours. Dalia spent the time making calls, former colleagues, friendly contacts, people who owed her favors, and people who would want to collect them later. By the time she reached Tampa, she had a picture forming. Cassidy Vance had not fled randomly. She had planned her escape months ago, a go-bag in her car, cash reserves in a separate account, a network of friends who could provide safe houses. The kind of preparation that suggested she had always known this day might come, which meant she knew more than she had revealed, and which meant somewhere in Cassidy's preparation there was a mistake, a loose thread, a connection that would lead Dalia to wherever she had gone. She just needed to find it. At 11:45 that night, Dalia pulled into the parking lot of the apartment complex where Cassidy had lived. The building was dark except for a few scattered windows, and crime scene tape still marked the entrance to Cassidy's unit. Dalia didn't go inside. Instead, she walked around the building to the dumpster area, a narrow space between the main structure and a storage shed that most residents used for trash and recyclables. She had noticed something during her earlier surveillance. Cassidy Vance had been meticulous about her digital security, encrypted phones, secure email, careful attention to what she said in recorded environments. But she had been less careful about physical security. Specifically, she had a habit of smoking cigarettes on her balcony, and she had a habit of throwing the butts into the dumpster area rather than the designated ashtrays. Dalia pulled on a pair of gloves and began searching. It took 45 minutes, but eventually she found what she was looking for. A cigarette butt, partially smoked, discarded recently, wrapped around a small piece of paper, an address, and a name she didn't recognize. Judge R. Sutter, 2847, Lakewood Drive, Friday, 8 p.m. Dalia stared at the paper for a long moment. Judge Roland Sutter, the judge who was connected to Preston, the judge who had been handling cases where Preston's clients received suspiciously favorable outcomes. Cassidy had been meeting with him, and she had written down the address as if she needed to remember it, as if this was a new arrangement, as if something had changed recently enough that she hadn't yet memorized the location. Dalia photographed the paper, sealed it in an evidence bag, and walked back to her car. Friday was 2 days away. She had work to do. The next morning, Dalia met with her federal contacts. The evidence she had found was circumstantial. A note in a dumpster wasn't enough to charge anyone with anything, but it was enough to justify enhanced surveillance. By noon, the FBI had a team watching Judge Sutter's home on Lakewood Drive. By Thursday evening, they had something more. He had a visitor. Agent Marcus Webb, no relation to the journalist ironically, spread photographs across the table. Male, mid-50s, driving a rental car with plates traced to a company in the Cayman Islands. Who is he? We're still working on that. But here's the interesting part. Marcus tapped one of the photographs. He was carrying a briefcase. When he left 2 hours later, he wasn't carrying it anymore. Dalia studied the photograph. The man's face was partially obscured by shadows, but something about his posture seemed familiar. Can you enhance this? Already done. Marcus slid another photograph across the table. Meet Victor Hale, former partner at Weil and Hargrove, left the firm 8 years ago under circumstances that were never fully explained, currently listed as a consultant for various offshore entities. He's the cleaner. That's our theory. Marcus leaned back. When things get too hot, Victor shows up to make problems disappear. The briefcase probably contained either cash or documents, instructions for the next phase of whatever they're planning. And Cassidy Vance? Still missing, but we found something interesting. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her a bank record. A wire transfer, $20,000, moved from an account in the Caymans to an account in Costa Rica. The Costa Rican account was opened 3 days ago under the name Clara Vincent. Cassidy's grandmother's name was Clara. You do your research. Marcus smiled. We're coordinating with Costa Rican authorities, but extradition will take months. She's safe for now. Dalia looked at the photographs, the bank records, the web of connections that was slowly becoming visible. What about Friday? The meeting at Judge Sutter's house? We'll have surveillance in place, but we can't move without more evidence. Right now, all we have is a judge having a private meeting at his home. That's not illegal. It will be if he's coordinating with Victor Hale to obstruct a federal investigation. Proof, Ms. Clover. Marcus's voice was patient. We need proof. Dalia understood, but she also understood something that Marcus didn't. She had spent 12 years watching powerful people protect each other, watching investigations stall, watching evidence disappear, watching victims give up because the system was too exhausting to fight. She was done waiting for proof. She was going to get it herself. Friday evening, Dalia parked her car 3 blocks from Judge Sutter's house. She had told no one where she was going. If this went wrong, if she was caught, if something happened, there would be no official sanction, no institutional protection, no lawyers to argue on her behalf. She was operating outside the rules, and she was prepared to accept the consequences. The neighborhood was quiet, large houses on large lots, the kind of place where privacy was both expected and enforced. Dalia moved through the shadows, staying off the main paths, using the skills she had developed over 12 years of surveillance. Judge Sutter's house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, 2 stories, colonial style, with a wraparound porch and a 3-car garage. The lights were on in what appeared to be a study on the first floor. Dalia circled the property, looking for access points. The FBI surveillance team was positioned on the main road, watching the front entrance. But there was a service road behind the house, a path that maintenance crews used to access the wooded area beyond the property line. No one was watching the service road. Dalia made her way through the trees, her dark clothing blending into the evening shadows. The leaves were wet from recent rain, muffling her footsteps as she approached the back of the house. The study had a window, and the window was cracked open. She could hear voices. Can't keep doing this. A voice she didn't recognize, male, nervous. You don't have a choice, Judge Sutter's voice, calm, controlled. Preston's arrest changes everything. If he decides to cooperate, he won't cooperate. He knows what happens to people who cooperate. He knows what you tell him, and right now, you're telling him that his connections will protect him, that he'll walk away with a slap on the wrist. A pause. But what happens when the federal prosecutors offer him a deal? 10 years instead of 20? Immunity for testimony against his associates? Preston won't turn. Everyone turns. Eventually. Judge Sutter's voice hardened. That's why we need insurance. Something that guarantees his silence. What kind of insurance? The investigator, Clover. Dalia's blood went cold. She's the one who built this case. She's the one who recorded Preston's confession. If something happens to her, if the recordings disappear, if the evidence is compromised, if she becomes unreliable. You're talking about destroying evidence, intimidating a witness. I'm talking about survival. Judge Sutter's voice was ice. 20 years, Victor. 20 years of arrangements, payments, favors, all of it at risk because one woman decided to be a hero. Silence, long and heavy. What do you want me to do? I want you to make the problem go away, permanently. Dalia stopped breathing. She had expected corruption. She had expected obstruction. She had expected the kind of institutional protection that powerful men always received from other powerful men. She had not expected them to order her death. That's a significant step. Victor's voice was measured, professional. There would be costs, both financial and otherwise. Name them. 200,000, half up front, and your personal guarantee that if anything goes wrong, you'll ensure the investigation goes nowhere. Agreed. Dalia's hands were shaking. She needed to move. She needed to get out of here, get to the FBI, report what she had heard. A branch snapped under her foot. The voices stopped. What was that? Dalia turned and ran. Behind her she heard the back door open, heard shouts, heard footsteps crashing through the underbrush. She ran faster than she had ever run before, through the trees, across the service road, into the darkness beyond. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed. The bruises from last week's assault pulsed with fresh pain. But she didn't stop. She reached her car and fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so badly that she dropped them twice. Finally, the engine started and she was moving, pulling away from the curb and accelerating into the night. She drove for 10 minutes before she pulled over and called Marcus Webb. This is Clover. I need immediate protective custody, and I need the FBI to execute a warrant on Judge Roland Sutter's residence, tonight. The voice on the other end was confused, asking questions. Because I just heard him order a hit on my life. Dalia's voice was surprisingly steady, and because I recorded the entire conversation. She held up her phone, the backup phone, the one that had been recording since she entered the woods. Every single word. The arrest of Judge Roland Sutter made national news. The FBI moved within hours, executing warrants on his home and his chambers simultaneously. They found cash. They found documents. They found evidence of 30 years of corruption. Cases fixed, sentences reduced, evidence disappeared. All of it carefully documented in files that Sutter had been arrogant enough to keep. Preston Weil, facing the prospect of federal charges and the testimony of his former patron, began negotiating a plea deal. His attorneys fought, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the financial records, the testimony of witnesses who had been silent for years and were finally ready to talk. Margot Hargrove was charged with obstruction and conspiracy. She maintained her innocence, but the trial was scheduled for the fall, and prosecutors were confident. Victor Hale was apprehended at the Miami airport, attempting to board a flight to Dubai. His briefcase contained $200,000 in cash and a file labeled Clover, D. Termination. The system was, finally, beginning to crack. But Dalia knew better than to celebrate. 3 weeks after Sutter's arrest, she sat in her apartment, reviewing the case files that would occupy her for the next 2 years. Depositions to prepare, witnesses to interview, evidence to organize, the slow, grinding work of prosecution that would determine whether justice was actually served. Her phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. She stared at the message for a long moment. Then she blocked the number, set down her phone, and returned to work. Cassidy Vance was still missing. Judge Sutter had connections that reached beyond what anyone had yet discovered, and somewhere in the shadows of the system she had dedicated her life to reforming. Other powerful men were watching, learning, preparing for the next battle. The case against Preston Weil was just the beginning. The real fight was still ahead. To be continued in Part 2. 4 months later, Dalia Clover stood in the hallway of the federal courthouse in Tampa, watching the doors to Courtroom 2A with the patience of someone who had learned that justice moved slowly when it moved at all. Inside that courtroom, Preston Weil was pleading guilty. Not to everything. His attorneys had negotiated for weeks, trading information for reduced charges, offering cooperation in exchange for sentencing recommendations. The original indictment, 12 counts including bribery, witness tampering, and conspiracy to obstruct justice, had been whittled down to 3. The maximum sentence had dropped from 40 years to 8. The system was protecting its own. But 8 years was still 8 years, and the plea deal required something that Preston's attorneys had fought desperately to avoid: testimony against his co-conspirators, including Judge Roland Sutter, including Margot Hargrove, including the names that hadn't yet been made public, the network of lawyers, judges, and officials who had spent 30 years turning the Hillsborough County legal system into their personal profit center. Dalia had spent the past 4 months preparing for this moment. Depositions, witness interviews, document reviews that stretched into the small hours of the morning. The kind of work that never made it into news stories or dramatic reenactments. The slow, grinding labor of building a case that could survive the scrutiny of defense attorneys who charged $1,000 an hour. She had also spent the past 4 months looking over her shoulder. The threatening texts had continued. Different numbers, different phrasing, but always the same message. She was being watched. She was not safe. The case she was building would never reach trial. The FBI had assigned protective detail, but resources were limited and threats were constant. Dalia had learned to vary her routes, check her mirrors, trust her instincts. She had also learned to sleep with a weapon within reach, something she had never done before in 12 years of this work. The courtroom doors opened. A stream of people emerged: attorneys, journalists, court staff. Dalia scanned faces automatically, cataloging each one, looking for anything out of place. Marcus Webb appeared at her elbow. "It's done." His voice was quiet, professional. Preston accepted the deal, sentencing in 6 weeks. And the cooperation agreement? Signed and sealed. He starts debriefings tomorrow. Marcus paused. "The first name on his list is Roland Sutter." Dalia nodded. She had expected that. Sutter was the most vulnerable target, the one whose arrest had generated the most evidence. Taking him down first would demonstrate that Preston's cooperation was genuine. But Sutter wasn't the one who worried her. What about Cassidy Vance? Marcus's expression shifted. Something that might have been frustration, or resignation, or both. "Still in Costa Rica. The extradition request is moving through diplomatic channels, but..." He shrugged. "You know how these things work." She did know. International extradition could take years, assuming Costa Rica agreed to cooperate at all. In the meantime, Cassidy Vance was free, protected by geography and bureaucracy, carrying whatever secrets she had taken when she fled. "She's the key." Dalia kept her voice low. "Whatever Preston knows, Cassidy knows more. She was his paralegal for 3 years. She had access to everything." "We're aware." Marcus's tone suggested he had heard this argument before. "But we can't force a foreign government to act on our timeline." "Then I'll go to her." Marcus stopped walking. "Excuse me?" "Costa Rica. I'll fly down, make contact, see if she's willing to talk." Dalia met his eyes. She ran because she was scared. But she also ran because she was prepared, which means she was thinking about this for a long time. People who think that carefully usually want an exit strategy. "And you think you can offer her one?" "I think I can offer her something better than hiding in a foreign country for the rest of her life." Dalia gestured toward the courtroom. "Preston just pled guilty. Sutter is facing trial. The network they built is collapsing. Cassidy can either be part of the wreckage, or she can be the person who helped bring it down." Marcus considered this for a long moment. "I'll have to clear it with the Bureau, and the State Department, and about 6 other agencies that will want to have opinions." He sighed. "But I'll make the calls." "Thank you." Dalia turned to leave, and froze. Across the hallway, watching her with an expression of absolute calm, was Tyrell Boone. He shouldn't have been there. He was out on bail, facing trial for battery and obstruction, prohibited from approaching any of the witnesses in his case. His presence in this building, in this hallway, was a violation of his release conditions. But he didn't move, didn't approach, just stood there, his eyes locked on Dalia's face, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Then he lifted his phone, took a photograph, and walked away. Marcus had already pulled out his radio. "We have a situation. Suspect Tyrell Boone just violated his release conditions. He's heading toward the east exit." Dalia didn't hear the rest. She was already calculating what Boone's presence meant, who had sent him, what message he was trying to deliver. The threatening texts had said she was being watched. Now she knew they weren't lying. Nu ban mun bit tai sao Tyrell Boone lai xuất hiện và ai đứng sau những tin nhắn đe dọa. Hãy like và subscribe ngay bây giờ. The flight to San Jose, Costa Rica, departed 3 weeks later. Dalia had spent the intervening time preparing, studying maps, reviewing intelligence reports, learning enough Spanish to handle basic conversations. The FBI had provided contacts in the Costa Rican authorities, but everyone understood that this was not an official operation. If something went wrong, Dalia would be on her own. She was used to being on her own. The plane landed at Juan Santa Maria International Airport at 2 p.m, local time. The heat hit her the moment she stepped off the jetway, humid, heavy, oppressive, and she found herself missing the controlled climate of Florida courtrooms. Her contact was waiting at the arrivals gate. Ms. Clover? A woman in her 30s, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing clothes that suggested government work without advertising it. "I'm Lieutenant Elena Vargas, Organismo de Investigación Judicial. I'll be your liaison during your stay. Thank you for meeting me." The bureau was very insistent. Vargas's smile was professional but not warm. "They made it clear that your safety is a priority, which suggests that someone wants you dead." Dalia appreciated the directness. Several someones, actually. "Then we should move quickly." Vargas gestured toward the exit. "I have a car waiting, and information you'll want to see." They walked through the airport in silence, passing tourists in bright clothing and business travelers in rumpled suits. Dalia kept her awareness high, scanning faces, watching for anything that seemed out of place. The parking garage was hot and dim. Vargas's car, an unmarked sedan with tinted windows, was parked near the elevator. "Clara Vincent." Vargas unlocked the car and gestured for Dalia to enter. "That's the name she's using. She rented an apartment in Escazú 3 months ago, paid 6 months in advance, cash, keeps to herself. No visitors, no local contacts, no attempts to establish a new identity. She's waiting. That's my assessment." Vargas started the engine. "She knows someone will eventually find her. She's just not sure who it will be, or what they'll want." "Has anyone else been looking?" Vargas pulled out of the parking garage and merged into traffic. The roads were chaotic, cars, motorcycles, pedestrians all competing for space, but she navigated with practiced ease. 3 weeks ago, 2 men arrived on a flight from Miami, American passports, but the names didn't match any known individuals. They rented a car, drove to Escazú, and spent 2 days watching the apartment building where Clara Vincent lives. Dalia's stomach tightened. What happened to them? "They left, flew back to Miami." Vargas glanced at her. "But before they left, they met with someone at a hotel in downtown San Jose. A woman, also American, also traveling under a name we couldn't verify." "Description?" 50s, silver hair, expensive clothes, the kind of person who expects to be obeyed. "Margot Hargrove." Dalia closed her eyes. Margot was supposed to be in Florida, preparing for her trial. Her bail conditions included surrender of her passport and prohibition on international travel. But Margot had resources, connections, the kind of influence that made inconvenient legal restrictions disappear. "Do you have surveillance footage?" "Better." Vargas reached into her pocket and produced a photograph. "We had someone inside the hotel. The photograph showed Margot Hargrove sitting at a cafe table, speaking with two men in casual clothes. One of the men was taking notes. The other was showing her something on a tablet. A map, maybe, or a photograph. "She's hunting Cassidy." Dalia's voice was flat. "Just like I am." "Yes, but for different reasons, I think." Vargas returned the photograph to her pocket. "You want information. She wants silence." The implication was clear. If Margot found Cassidy first, there would be no testimony, no cooperation, no evidence, just another disappearance that no one would investigate too closely. "How far is Escalating?" 20 minutes in this traffic." Vargas accelerated through a yellow light. "I suggest we don't waste time." The apartment building was unremarkable. 4 stories, concrete construction, the kind of place that attracted foreigners who wanted privacy without luxury. Dalia studied it from across the street, noting the exits, the sight lines, the places where someone could wait unseen. "3rd floor, Unit 304. Vargas checked her phone. "She's home. My team confirmed movement in the apartment 30 minutes ago." "What's the approach?" "Direct. You knock. You talk. I wait here in case something goes wrong." Vargas met Dalia's eyes. "But I should warn you, if Margot's people are already in the city, they may be watching this building too." "I know." Dalia crossed the street and entered the building. The lobby was empty. No doorman, no security cameras that she could see. The elevator was slow and loud, announcing her arrival to anyone paying attention. She took the stairs instead. 3rd floor, long hallway, fluorescent lights, numbered doors. Unit 304 was at the end, near a window that looked out over a narrow alley. Dalia knocked. Silence. She knocked again. "Ms. Vincent? My name is Dalia Clover. I'm an investigator with the Florida Bar. I'd like to talk to you about Preston Weil." More silence. But there was movement behind the door, subtle, barely audible. Someone shifting their weight, someone deciding what to do. "I'm not here to arrest you. I'm not here to force you to do anything." Dalia kept her voice calm. "I'm here because Preston is going to prison, and Judge Sutter is going to trial, and the only question now is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem." A long pause. Then the door opened. Cassidy Vance looked different than she had 4 months ago. Thinner, paler. The confident ambition that had defined her had been replaced by something more fragile. Wariness, maybe, or exhaustion. "How did you find me?" "You're not as hidden as you think." Dalia kept her hands visible, non-threatening. "Can I come in?" Cassidy hesitated. Her eyes moved past Dalia, checking the hallway, looking for threats. "There are people looking for me." "I know. I saw the surveillance footage." Something flickered in Cassidy's eyes. Fear, recognition, resignation. "Margot." "Yes." Cassidy stepped back from the door. "Then you should come in, quickly." The apartment was small and sparse. A single room with a bed, a kitchenette, and a window covered with heavy curtains. Cassidy had been living here for 3 months, and there were almost no personal touches, no photographs, no decorations, nothing that suggested she planned to stay. "You've been waiting." Dalia took a seat on the room's only chair. "For someone to come." "I've been waiting for the right person to come." Cassidy sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped in her lap. "If it was Margot's people, I had a plan. If it was the police, I had a different plan. And if it was me, I didn't plan for you." Cassidy's laugh was brief and bitter. "I assumed the Florida Bar would send someone official, someone with backup, someone who would arrest me the moment they found me." "I'm not here to arrest you." "So you said." Cassidy studied Dalia's face. "But that doesn't mean I trust you." "You don't have to trust me. You just have to understand your options." Dalia leaned forward. "Option 1. You stay here. Eventually, Margot's people find you. We both know how that ends." Cassidy said nothing. "Option 2. You run again. New name, new country, new life. But you'll be running forever, and every day you'll wonder if today is the day they catch up. Still nothing. Option 3. You come back. You testify. You tell the truth about what you saw and what you did. Dalia paused. In exchange, the federal prosecutors offer you immunity, full immunity. You don't face charges. You don't go to prison. You start over, legally, openly, without looking over your shoulder. Cassidy's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a slight relaxation, a loosening of the tension she had been carrying. You can't guarantee immunity. I can't, but the prosecutors can, and they will, because what you know is more valuable than what you did. You don't know what I did. I know you were Preston's paralegal for 3 years. I know you had access to his files, his communications, his financial records. I know you ran because you understood exactly how much trouble you were in, and exactly how much trouble you could cause for the people who were protecting you. Cassidy stood and walked to the window. She pulled the curtain aside slightly, just enough to see the street below. It wasn't just Preston. Her voice was quiet. It was never just Preston. I know. There were others, judges, prosecutors, politicians. Cassidy let the curtain fall. A whole network, going back 30 years. They called themselves the Circle. Inside joke, they controlled who went in circles through the legal system and who walked free. Dalia felt her pulse quicken. This was what she had been looking for. Not just evidence against Preston, but evidence against the entire structure that had enabled him. How many? I don't know the exact number. Preston kept me away from the highest levels. Cassidy turned to face her. But I have records, documents that Preston thought were destroyed, names that nobody has connected yet. Where are these records? Hidden. Safe. Cassidy's eyes were hard now, calculating. Insurance, in case someone decided I was a liability. Margot. She was the one who gave the orders, not Preston. He was the face, the charmer, the one who made the deals. But Margot was the one who made things disappear. Evidence. Witnesses. People. Cassidy's voice dropped. There was a paralegal before me. Her name was Jennifer Walsh. She found out too much. One day she just stopped coming to work. Nobody asked questions. Nobody filed a report. She just vanished. Dalia thought about the threatening texts, the photograph Tyrell Boone had taken, the network of watchers that seemed to know her every move. Is that why you ran? I ran because I saw what they did to people who talked. Cassidy sat back down on the bed. And because I knew that eventually someone would have to answer for all of it. I just didn't want it to be me. It doesn't have to be you, not if you cooperate. Cooperate? Cassidy laughed again, the same bitter sound. You make it sound simple. Like I can just walk into a courtroom and tell the truth and everything will be fine. It won't be simple. It won't be safe, but it's your best option. Dalia rose from her chair. The alternative is waiting here until Margot's people find you, and we both know they will. Cassidy was silent for a long moment. Outside, the sun was setting. The room was growing dark, shadows pooling in the corners. There's something you should know. Cassidy's voice was barely a whisper. About the circle, about who's really in charge. Tell me. It's not Margot. It's not even Preston or Sutter. Cassidy met Dalia's eyes. There's someone else. Someone higher. Someone who's been pulling strings for decades. Who? I don't know the name. I only saw him once, at a meeting that I wasn't supposed to know about. Cassidy's hands were trembling. But I know what he looked like, and I know where the meeting happened. Tell me. Cassidy opened her mouth to respond, and the window exploded, glass everywhere. Dalia hit the floor instinctively, covering her head as shards rained down around her. Something punched through the air above her, a sound she recognized from training exercises. Suppressed gunfire. Cassidy was screaming. Dalia rolled toward the bed, putting the heavy wooden frame between herself and the window. She grabbed Cassidy's arm and pulled her down. "Stay low. Don't move." Another shot. This one hit the wall above the kitchenette, sending plaster flying. Someone was shooting at them from the building across the alley. A professional, using a suppressed rifle, targeting anyone who moved. "Is there another way out?" Cassidy was shaking, her face white with terror. "The bathroom. There's a window. It leads to a fire escape. Go. Now." Dalia stayed low, crawling toward the apartment door while Cassidy scrambled toward the bathroom. Another shot came through the broken window, missing her by inches. She reached the door and pulled it open. The hallway was empty. No one had come to investigate the noise yet. "Vargas!" Dalia pulled out her phone. "Shooter in the building across the alley. 3rd floor, east side. We're evacuating through the fire escape." Vargas's response was immediate. "I see the muzzle flash. We're moving to intercept." Dalia pushed herself to her feet and sprinted toward the bathroom. Cassidy was already halfway out the window, her movements clumsy with fear. "Faster! They may have people on the ground." Cassidy dropped onto the fire escape. Dalia followed, the metal grating cold and slick under her shoes. They descended 2 floors before Dalia saw them. 2 men at the bottom of the fire escape, waiting. One of them was raising a weapon. "Back up!" Dalia grabbed Cassidy and shoved her toward the 2nd floor landing. There was a window there. Dark. Curtains drawn. Locked. Dalia kicked it open. They tumbled into someone's living room. An elderly man was sitting on a couch, watching television. He started to shout, but Dalia was already past him, dragging Cassidy toward the front door. "Sorry! Emergency!" They burst into the hallway, stairs at the end, going down toward the lobby. "Not that way." Dalia pulled Cassidy toward the other end of the hallway. "They'll have the exits covered." "Then where?" "The roof." They took the stairs 2 at a time, climbing instead of descending. Behind them, Dalia could hear doors opening, voices shouting, the chaos of disrupted lives. 4th floor. Then the roof access, a heavy metal door with a sign warning that alarms would sound. Dalia kicked it open anyway. The alarm was deafening, but the roof was empty. Dalia scanned the surrounding buildings. The shooter's position was across the alley, on the same level. She could see the open window, the curtains moving in the breeze. "There." She pointed toward the next building. A gap of maybe 8 feet between the rooftops. Jumpable, if you didn't think about it too hard. "I can't." "You can." Dalia grabbed Cassidy's hand. "We go together. On 3. I'm not. 1. Please. 2. Cassidy's grip tightened. 3. They ran. The edge of the roof approached. Dalia pushed off with everything she had. And they were flying. For 1 eternal second there was nothing but air beneath them. Then impact. Hard concrete. Dalia rolled, pulling Cassidy with her, absorbing the shock as best she could. Pain shot through her shoulder. She ignored it. "Move. Keep moving." They crossed the 2nd roof, found a fire escape on the far side, descended into an alley that faced away from the original building. Vargas's car was waiting at the end of the alley, engine running. "Get in." They dove into the back seat. Vargas accelerated before the doors were fully closed, tires squealing as she turned onto the main road. The shooter? Escaped. My team found the position, but he was already gone. Vargas glanced in the rearview mirror. Professional, clean, no shell casings left behind. Dalia looked at Cassidy. The younger woman was shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. "They found me." Her voice was barely audible. "They found me." "They found you." Dalia's voice was steady. "But you're still alive. And now you have a choice to make." Cassidy looked at her with eyes full of terror and exhaustion, and something else. Something that might have been resolve. "I want immunity, in writing, before I say another word." "Done." Dalia pulled out her phone and began to dial. The extraction was underway. The flight back to Miami departed at midnight. Cassidy was in protective custody now. Federal marshals, safe house, the full apparatus of witness protection. She had signed the cooperation agreement before they left the country, her hands still trembling from the roof escape. In exchange for full immunity, she would provide testimony against Preston Weil, Margot Hargrove, Judge Roland Sutter, and the remaining members of the circle. More importantly, she would provide the documents she had hidden. 3 terabytes of data, emails, financial records, meeting notes, surveillance footage, all of it stored on encrypted drives in a safety deposit box in the Cayman Islands. The keys were in her possession. The location was known only to her. It would take months to process everything, but Dalia already knew what they would find. Evidence of systematic corruption spanning 3 decades, judges who had sold verdicts, prosecutors who had buried cases, politicians who had accepted bribes in exchange for appointments and policy decisions. The circle had controlled the Hillsborough County legal system for a generation, and now, finally, it was going to fall. Ko Chuen Kang Luk Kang Kung Tang. Hey like video ne va cha toi beat trong comment. Bạn nghi, I langui dung do circle. The trial of Judge Roland Sutter began on a Tuesday in February. 6 months had passed since Preston Weil's guilty plea. 6 months of depositions, discovery battles, and procedural motions that had tested Dalia's patience and stamina. The defense had fought every step, challenging evidence, questioning witnesses, filing appeals that went nowhere but consumed time and resources. But they had not stopped the trial. Now, finally, it was happening. Dalia sat in the gallery, watching as the jury was sworn in. 12 citizens, chosen after weeks of voir dire, tasked with deciding whether a sitting federal judge had conspired to obstruct justice and accepted bribes in exchange for favorable rulings. The stakes were enormous. If Sutter was convicted, it would validate everything Dalia had worked for. It would prove that even the most powerful members of the legal system could be held accountable. If he was acquitted, it would send a different message. That connections mattered more than evidence, that the system protected its own, no matter what they had done. The prosecution's opening statement was methodical, detailed, a roadmap of the evidence they would present. Recordings, financial records, testimony from cooperating witnesses. The defense's opening was something else entirely. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Sutter's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Harrison Cole, one of the most expensive criminal defense lawyers in the country, rose slowly, his movements deliberate. The prosecution wants you to believe that Judge Roland Sutter is a criminal, a man who betrayed his oath, a corrupt official who sold justice to the highest bidder. He paused, letting the accusation hang in the air. But what they won't tell you is this. The entire case against my client is built on the testimony of liars, thieves, and criminals who will say anything to save themselves. Cole walked toward the jury box, his voice dropping to a conversational tone. Preston Weil, a convicted felon facing 20 years in prison, who traded his testimony for a reduced sentence. Cassidy Vance, a fugitive who fled the country with stolen documents and only returned when she was offered immunity. Dalia Clover? He turned and looked directly at Dalia. A so-called investigator who conducted illegal surveillance, violated civil rights, and manufactured evidence to support a predetermined conclusion. Dalia kept her face neutral. She had expected this. The defense would attack her credibility, her methods, everything they could use to create reasonable doubt. The prosecution will show you recordings, documents, testimony. Cole's voice hardened. But they cannot show you the truth, because the truth is that Judge Roland Sutter is an innocent man, targeted by political enemies and ambitious prosecutors who care more about headlines than justice. He returned to the defense table and placed his hand on Sutter's shoulder. When this trial is over, I am confident that you will see through the lies and the manipulation, and I am confident that you will return the only verdict that justice demands, not guilty. The judge, a visiting jurist from the 11th Circuit, brought in because every local judge had been recused, nodded. The prosecution may call its first witness. Assistant U.S. Attorney Diana Vega rose. The United States calls Dalia Clover. The walk from the gallery to the witness stand felt longer than it should have. Dalia had testified dozens of times in her career. Disciplinary hearings, civil trials, administrative proceedings. She knew how to present evidence, how to answer questions, how to maintain composure under pressure. But this was different. This was the culmination of everything. Every hour of surveillance, every threatening text, every moment when she had wondered if she would survive to see this day. She took the oath and sat down. Diana Vega approached with a folder of documents. Ms. Clover, please state your current position for the record. Senior Investigator, Florida Bar Office of Lawyer Regulation. I've held this position for 12 years. And in that capacity, did you investigate allegations of misconduct against the defendant, Judge Roland Sutter? I did. The examination proceeded methodically. Dalia walked the jury through the investigation, the initial complaints, the surveillance, the recordings. She explained the evidence without editorializing, letting the facts speak for themselves. The recording of Sutter ordering the hit on her life was played in open court. I want you to make the problem go away, permanently. The courtroom was silent. Several jurors were visibly shaken. When the prosecution finished, Harrison Cole rose for cross-examination. Ms. Clover, he smiled, a practiced expression of professional courtesy. You've been an investigator for 12 years. Impressive. How many cases have you brought against federal judges in that time? This is the first. The first. So you have no experience investigating federal judges. No training specific to judicial misconduct. No specialized expertise in this particular area of law. I have extensive experience investigating attorneys and officers of the court. The legal principles are similar. Are they? Cole walked toward the witness stand. Let's talk about your methods. You conducted surveillance on Judge Sutter's home, correct? Correct. Without a warrant. I was not acting as law enforcement. I was conducting an investigation under the auspices of the Florida Bar. The Florida Bar has no jurisdiction over federal judges. That's correct. But the information I gathered was subsequently used by the FBI, which does have jurisdiction. So you gathered information outside your authority, then handed it to federal agents who used it to build a case. Cole's tone sharpened. Some might call that a partnership. Others might call it an end run around constitutional protections. Objection. Diana's voice was calm. Argumentative. Sustained. Cole didn't miss a beat. Ms. Clover, you testified that you recorded Judge Sutter without his knowledge or consent. Is that correct? It's correct that the recording was made without his knowledge. Under Florida law, only one party to a conversation needs to consent to recording. I was that party. You were physically present during the conversation? Dalia paused. This was the moment she had been dreading, the weakness in the case that Cole had clearly identified. I was present on the property. I recorded the conversation through an open window. An open window. Cole's eyebrows rose. So you were trespassing on Judge Sutter's property while conducting this recording? I was on a public service road adjacent to the property. Were you? Let's look at a map. Cole produced an exhibit, an aerial photograph of Sutter's property with boundary lines marked. This is your position, according to your testimony. He pointed to a spot on the photograph. And this is the property line. Do you see the problem, Ms. Clover? Dalia studied the photograph. The boundary line was different than she remembered, closer to the service road, suggesting that she had been on private property when she made the recording. I believed I was on public land. You believed? Cole's smile widened. But belief isn't the same as fact, is it? And if you were on private property, trespassing, then the recording you made might not be admissible at all. Objection. Diana rose. The admissibility of the recording has already been ruled on by this court. I'm not challenging admissibility, Your Honor. I'm establishing the witness's credibility. Cole turned back to Dalia. Ms. Clover, you testified under oath that you were on public land, but this photograph suggests otherwise. Either you were mistaken or you were lying. Which is it? Dalia met his eyes. I was not lying. I believed I was on public land based on my understanding of the property boundaries. If that understanding was incorrect, it was an honest mistake. An honest mistake that just happened to produce the most damaging piece of evidence against my client. Cole shook his head. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is the foundation of the prosecution's case. A recording made by a trespasser. Testimony from convicted felons. Documents obtained by a fugitive. He turned back to Dalia. No further questions. The judge looked at Diana. Redirect? Diana rose slowly. Ms. Clover, you testified that you believed you were on public land when you made the recording. What was the basis for that belief? I consulted county property records before conducting the surveillance. Those records indicated that the service road was public property maintained by the county. And do you have documentation of those records? Yes. I have copies that I obtained before the surveillance operation. Diana produced a new exhibit. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Prosecution Exhibit 47, county property records showing that the service road adjacent to Judge Sutter's property is, in fact, public land maintained by Hillsborough County. Cole's expression flickered, surprise, quickly suppressed. Your Honor, we haven't seen this document. It was disclosed in discovery 6 weeks ago. Diana's voice was pleasant. Defense Exhibit 12 appears to use different boundary lines than the official county records. Perhaps Mr. Cole would like to explain that discrepancy? The judge looked at Cole. Counsel? Cole recovered quickly. We'll address this in our case in chief, Your Honor. But the damage was done. The jury had seen Cole's confident attack crumble. They had seen his exhibit contradicted by official records. They had seen Dalia remain calm under pressure, admitting uncertainty while maintaining her credibility. It wasn't a decisive victory, but it was a start. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Dalia testified for 2 days. Preston Weil testified for 3, his cooperation agreement requiring him to answer every question truthfully, no matter how damaging to himself or his former associates. Cassidy Vance testified for 1.5 days, her testimony supported by the documents she had provided, emails, financial records, meeting notes that corroborated every claim the prosecution made. The defense called character witnesses, colleagues who praised Sutter's integrity, attorneys who had appeared before him and found him fair, community leaders who spoke of his charitable work and civic engagement. But they could not explain the recordings. They could not explain the financial transfers. They could not explain why a federal judge had ordered the murder of a state investigator. On the final day, the jury deliberated for 6 hours. Then they returned with a verdict. On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice, how does the jury find? The foreperson, a middle-aged woman in a blue dress, stood. Guilty. On the charge of bribery of a public official, how does the jury find? Guilty. On the charge of solicitation of murder, how does the jury find? Guilty. Dalia closed her eyes. 3 convictions, all felonies. Minimum sentence of 15 years. Judge Roland Sutter would die in prison. Behind her, she heard someone crying, Sutter's wife, maybe, or one of his supporters. She heard Harrison Cole demanding a poll of the jury, his voice tight with controlled fury. But mostly she heard silence, the silence of justice, finally delivered. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 months later. In the interim, the remaining cases proceeded. Margot Hargrove pleaded guilty to obstruction and conspiracy, accepting a deal that would give her 8 years in federal prison. Tyrell Boone was convicted of battery and witness intimidation, receiving 5 years. The circle was collapsing, but not completely. Cassidy's documents had revealed the existence of a figure she called the chairman, a shadowy leader who had directed the circle's operations for decades. The documents contained references to meetings, communications, decisions that had shaped the network's activities, but they did not contain a name. And without a name, the investigation had stalled. Dalia spent weeks reviewing the evidence, looking for patterns, connections, anything that might identify the chairman. She interviewed cooperating witnesses, analyzed financial records, traced communication networks. Nothing. The chairman had been careful, meticulous. Every reference to him was indirect. The principal, the authority, the source. No photographs, no direct communications, no evidence that could be used to build a case. He was still out there, and he was still dangerous. The threatening texts had stopped after Sutter's arrest. For months, Dalia's phone had been silent. No anonymous messages, no photographs, no reminders that she was being watched. She had started to believe that the danger had passed, that the chairman had decided to cut his losses rather than risk further exposure. She was wrong. The attack came on a Sunday evening. Dalia was leaving her apartment, heading to her car for a routine trip to the grocery store. The parking lot was quiet, early evening, most residents still inside. She didn't see the man until he was already on top of her. He came from behind, fast and professional, his arm wrapping around her throat before she could react. A chokehold, designed to render her unconscious in seconds. Dalia's training kicked in. She dropped her weight, bending her knees and driving her elbow backward into his ribs. The impact loosened his grip just enough for her to twist free. He was big, at least 6'2", 200 pounds, wearing dark clothes and a ski mask. No visible weapons, but that didn't mean he wasn't carrying. Dalia backed away, keeping her hands up, looking for options. "You should have stopped." His voice was muffled by the mask, but the tone was calm, professional. "After Sutter, you should have stopped." "Who sent you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he lunged forward, faster than she expected, closing the distance before she could retreat. She sidestepped, but not quickly enough. His fist caught her shoulder, spinning her around. Pain shot through her arm. She kept moving, grabbed her keys from her pocket, held them between her fingers like a weapon. He came again. She slashed at his face. The keys caught fabric, the edge of his mask, but didn't connect with skin. He grabbed her wrist, twisted. The keys fell from her grip. "This is your final warning." He pushed her backward, slamming her against the side of her car. "Stop the investigation. Stop looking for the chairman, or next time, I won't leave you breathing." Dalia's hand found the door handle behind her. "Tell your boss," she said through gritted teeth, "that I don't take orders from cowards who hide in the shadows." She pulled the door handle and threw herself sideways into the gap between her car and the next vehicle. The attacker reached for her, but she was already scrambling, putting distance between them. A car entered the parking lot. Headlights swept across the pavement. The attacker hesitated. Then he ran. Dalia lay on the concrete, gasping for breath, her shoulder throbbing. She could hear the other car parking, doors opening, voices asking if she was okay. She ignored them. She pulled out her phone and dialed Marcus Webb. "I need a security team at my apartment, now." Her voice was steady, despite the pain. "And I need everything we have on the chairman. Every document, every reference, every possible lead." "What happened?" "Someone just tried to kill me." Dalia pushed herself to her feet. "Which means we're getting close." The breakthrough came 3 days later. Dalia was reviewing Cassidy's documents for the 100th time when she noticed something she had missed before. A pattern in the financial transfers. Not the amounts, but the timing. Every major payment to Circle members had occurred within 48 hours of a specific event. The quarterly meeting of the Florida Bar Association's Board of Governors. 4 times a year. For 20 years. 80 payments. 80 meetings. And whoever was making those payments had to have access to the Board of Governors' schedule, which was not public information. Dalia pulled up the board's membership roster. 32 members, representing different sections of the bar. Attorneys from across the state, elected by their peers to govern the profession. She cross-referenced the roster with the names in Cassidy's documents. Most of the names didn't appear, but one did. A name that appeared exactly once, in a document from 15 years ago. A memo discussing reorganization of oversight procedures that mentioned a principal stakeholder whose input had been essential to the process. The memo was signed by Preston, and it was addressed to someone whose name Dalia recognized immediately. Harrison Cole, the defense attorney who had represented Judge Sutter, the silver-haired man who had cross-examined Dalia with such precision, the man who had access to the Board of Governors' schedule because he had been a member for 23 years, the chairman. The arrest of Harrison Cole made headlines across the country. Federal agents moved simultaneously on his home, his office, and his vacation property in the Keys. They found cash, hundreds of thousands of dollars in a hidden safe. They found documents, correspondence with circle members, records of payments and favors. They found a burner phone with text messages that traced directly to the threatening communications Dalia had received. They also found a kill list. Dalia's name was at the top. The trial would take months to prepare. Cole had resources, connections, attorneys who would fight every charge. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the financial records, the testimony of everyone who had already cooperated. The circle was finally, completely broken. The sentencing hearing for Judge Roland Sutter took place on a Friday in June. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, attorneys, members of the public who wanted to witness the conclusion of the case that had captivated the nation. Dalia sat in the gallery, watching as Sutter was led in, wearing the orange jumpsuit of a federal prisoner. He looked older than she remembered, diminished. The power and arrogance that had defined him had been replaced by something smaller. Defeat, maybe, or resignation. The judge, the same visiting jurist who had presided over the trial, reviewed the sentencing guidelines. Mr. Sutter, you have been convicted of conspiracy to obstruct justice, bribery of a public official, and solicitation of murder. These are serious crimes, crimes that strike at the heart of our justice system. Sutter said nothing. For 30 years you used your position to pervert the course of justice. You accepted bribes. You fixed cases. You ordered the murder of an investigator who threatened to expose your crimes. The judge's voice was cold. You betrayed every oath you took, every principle you were sworn to uphold. Still nothing. The sentencing guidelines recommend 20 to 25 years. However, given the severity of your crimes and the breach of public trust they represent, I am imposing the maximum sentence permitted by law. The judge looked directly at Sutter. Roland Sutter, I hereby sentence you to 30 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Sutter's face didn't change. But Dalia saw his hands, cuffed in front of him, clench into fists. This court is adjourned. Dalia left the courthouse and walked into the sunshine. The case was over. The circle was destroyed. Its leaders were in prison or awaiting trial. The system they had corrupted was beginning to reform. New oversight procedures, new transparency requirements, new mechanisms for accountability. It wasn't perfect. The system never changed overnight. There would be other circles, other networks, other powerful people who believed they were above the law. The work of holding them accountable would continue, slow, grinding, exhausting. But today, justice had been served. Dalia's phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. She hesitated before opening it. Congratulations, M. Clover. You've earned a rest. But there are other circles, other chairmen, other battles to fight. Whenever you're ready, we'll be watching. She stared at the message for a long moment. Then she blocked the number and put her phone away. She had been fighting for 12 years. She wasn't going to stop now. 6 months later, Dalia Clover was promoted to Chief Investigator of the Florida Bar's Office of Lawyer Regulation. The promotion came with a larger office, a bigger team, and more resources than she had ever had access to. It also came with new challenges, cases that were more complex, opponents who were more sophisticated, stakes that were higher than ever. She accepted without hesitation. Her first act as chief investigator was to review the backlog of complaints that had accumulated during the circle prosecutions. Hundreds of cases, representing years of misconduct that had been ignored or suppressed. Most were routine, fee disputes, missed deadlines, minor ethical violations. But some were not. One complaint, filed 3 years ago, described a pattern of behavior that felt disturbingly familiar: witness tampering, evidence manipulation, payments to officials who should have been neutral. The complaint had been dismissed without investigation. The attorney it accused was still practicing. Dalia pulled the file and began to read. The fight continued. Niu ban muon zem tham yung ko chuyen ve kung li nutane. Hay subscribe va bat chuong tong bao. Vadung quin like video ne de ong ho king. The final hearing in the Harrison Cole case was scheduled for October. By then, Dalia had rebuilt her team, restructured her office, and launched investigations into 3 new networks that had operated in the shadow of the circle. The work was relentless: long hours, difficult decisions, constant pressure from people who wanted her to fail. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Not when there were still people who believed the system would protect them. Not when there were still victims who had no one else to turn to. On the day of Cole's hearing, Dalia arrived at the courthouse early. The security line was long: journalists, attorneys, curious members of the public, but she moved through it quickly, her credentials getting her past the checkpoints that slowed everyone else. She found a seat in the gallery and waited. The courtroom filled gradually. Defense attorneys in expensive suits, prosecutors with thick folders, family members on both sides, their faces drawn with anticipation and dread. And then Harrison Cole was let in. He looked different than she remembered: thinner, grayer, the confidence that had defined him replaced by something more fragile. Prison had taken its toll, but his eyes were the same. When he saw Dalia in the gallery, he stopped walking. The marshals had to push him forward, guiding him to the defense table. But he kept looking at her, and in that look, she saw something she hadn't expected: fear. The chairman, the man who had controlled the circle for 30 years, who had ordered murders and corrupted judges and believed himself untouchable, was afraid of her. The hearing proceeded quickly. Cole's attorneys made their arguments. The prosecution responded. The judge considered the evidence and the sentencing guidelines. Harrison Cole, you have been convicted of racketeering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and solicitation of murder. These crimes represent a systematic betrayal of the legal profession you were sworn to serve. Cole said nothing. For 3 decades, you used your position and influence to corrupt the justice system for personal gain. You bribed judges. You intimidated witnesses. You ordered the deaths of people who threatened to expose your crimes. Still nothing. The sentencing guidelines recommend 35 years to life. However, given your leadership role in the criminal enterprise and the extraordinary breach of trust your crimes represent, I am imposing the maximum sentence. The judge looked at Cole. Harrison Cole, I hereby sentence you to life in federal prison, without possibility of parole. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Then Cole turned and looked at Dalia one final time. His lips moved. No sound came out, but she could read the words. This isn't over. Dalia held his gaze. Yes, she said quietly. It is. The marshals led Cole away. The courtroom began to empty. Attorneys gathering their papers, journalists rushing to file their stories, families dispersing to process what they had witnessed. Dalia remained in her seat. She thought about the case that had started it all. A complaint from a grieving mother. A pattern of misconduct that should have been investigated years earlier. A network of corruption that had been allowed to flourish because the people responsible for stopping it had chosen to look away. She thought about the people who had helped her: Marcus Webb, Diana Vega, Elena Vargas, Nina Valdez, who had quietly provided information from inside the bar when Dalia needed it most. She thought about the people who had tried to stop her: Preston Weil, Margot Hargrove, Roland Sutter, Harrison Cole, Tyrell Boone, Cassidy Vance, who had run before finally finding the courage to tell the truth. She thought about the people she would never meet, the victims of cases that had been fixed, the defendants who had been railroaded, the attorneys who had been silenced before they could speak. She thought about all of it, and then she stood up and walked out of the courtroom. The sun was setting over Tampa Bay. Dalia stood on the courthouse steps, watching the light fade over the water. The day's heat was beginning to dissipate, replaced by the cooler air of evening. Her phone buzzed. A text from her office. A new complaint had been filed. An attorney in Jacksonville, accused of manipulating evidence in a wrongful death case. She looked at the message for a long moment. Then she put her phone away and started walking toward her car. The case could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, she would go home. She would eat dinner. She would sleep, really sleep, for the first time in months. And tomorrow, she would start again, because that was what justice required. Not dramatic victories, not perfect outcomes, not stories that wrapped up neatly with all the villains punished and all the heroes rewarded. Just work. Steady, relentless, exhausting work. Day after day, case after case, until the system became a little bit better than it had been before. That was all she could do. That was all anyone could do. But it was enough. 3 months later, Dalia received a letter. It arrived at her office in a plain envelope with no return address. The postmark was from a small town in rural Georgia that she had never heard of. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Ms. Clover, you don't know me, but I know you. I've been following the circle cases since the beginning. I've watched you testify, read your depositions, studied your methods. I'm writing because I have information. Information about another network, bigger than the circle, operating across multiple states, protected by people at the highest levels of government. I can't give you details in writing, but if you're willing to meet, I can tell you everything I know. I understand if you're suspicious. You have every reason to be. But I've spent 20 years watching people like you try to fight the system and lose. I'm tired of watching. If you're interested, be at the Blue Moon Diner in Valdosta, Georgia on the first Saturday of next month. Noon. Come alone. I'll find you. A friend. Dalia read the letter 3 times. Then she placed it in her desk drawer next to the case files and the evidence reports and the endless paperwork that defined her work. She didn't know if the letter was genuine. She didn't know if a friend was telling the truth. She didn't know what she would find if she went to Valdosta, but she knew one thing. She was going to find out. The drive to Valdosta took 4 hours. Dalia left Tampa at 7 in the morning, taking back roads that kept her off the main highways. She varied her speed, checked her mirrors, watched for anyone following. Old habits. The Blue Moon Diner was exactly what she expected. A roadside restaurant with faded paint and a parking lot full of pickup trucks. The kind of place where strangers were noticed but not questioned. She arrived at 11:45 and took a booth near the back, facing the door. The diner was busy, families eating breakfast, truckers drinking coffee, locals catching up on gossip. No one paid attention to the black woman in the faded blazer who ordered coffee and waited. Noon came and went. 12:15. 12:30. Dalia was beginning to think she had made a mistake when a woman slid into the booth across from her. She was older than Dalia expected, 60 maybe, with gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that had seen too much. Her clothes were simple, jeans, a flannel shirt, work boots, but there was something about her posture that suggested she hadn't always dressed this way. Ms. Clover, you're the friend. I was once. The woman's voice was quiet. To people who trusted me. People who believed I would protect them. And now? Now I'm trying to make up for the things I didn't do. She placed a manila envelope on the table. This is everything I have. Names, dates, financial records. Enough to start an investigation, if you have the courage to pursue it. Dalia didn't touch the envelope. Who are you? Someone who used to work for the Department of Justice. Someone who saw things that she should have reported but didn't. The woman's eyes were haunted. I was afraid. I had a family, a career, a life I didn't want to lose, so I stayed silent. What changed? I watched the circle trials. I watched you testify. The woman leaned forward. And I realized that silence is just another form of complicity, that the only way to make things right is to speak, even when it costs you everything. Dalia studied her face, looking for deception, for manipulation, for any sign that this was a trap. She found none. What's in the envelope? Evidence of a network that makes the circle look like amateurs, judges, senators, cabinet officials, people whose names you would recognize from the evening news. The woman's voice dropped. People who have been operating for 40 years, invisible, untouchable, protected by layers of secrecy that no one has ever penetrated. Until now. Until now. The woman slid the envelope closer to Dalia. I can't tell you what to do with this. I can only tell you that if you pursue it, you'll be fighting enemies more powerful than anything you've faced before. I've heard that before. This time it's different. The woman stood. But I think you already know that. She placed a hand on Dalia's shoulder, brief, almost maternal. Be careful, Miss Clover. The people in that envelope don't lose. They can't afford to lose. And they will do anything, anything, to make sure you never bring them to justice. She walked away. Dalia watched her go, then looked down at the envelope. Her hands were steady as she opened it. Inside were documents. Names she recognized. Photographs she didn't. Financial records that traced connections she had never imagined. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was exactly what she had been looking for. Dalia closed the envelope and placed it in her bag. Then she paid for her coffee and walked out into the Georgia sunshine. The fight was just beginning. The drive back to Tampa felt longer than the drive up. Dalia's mind was racing, processing the information she had received, planning her next moves. The documents in the envelope represented years of investigation, evidence that no one else had ever assembled, connections that no one else had ever made. But they also represented danger. The woman had been right. The people in that envelope were more powerful than anyone Dalia had ever faced. They had resources that made the circle look like a neighborhood crime ring. They had connections that reached into every corner of government, and they had the will to protect themselves at any cost. Dalia had seen what that looked like. She had the scars to prove it. But she also had something they didn't expect. Experience. 12 years of fighting battles she wasn't supposed to win. 12 years of building cases against people who believed themselves untouchable. 12 years of learning how the system worked and how to make it work for the people it was supposed to serve. The circle had been powerful. The circle had fallen. This new enemy would be harder. But they would fall too. She was sure of it. Dalia arrived home at 10 in the evening. Her apartment was dark and quiet, exactly as she had left it. She swept the rooms out of habit, checking corners and closets, making sure nothing had been disturbed. Everything was normal. She placed the envelope on her kitchen table and sat down. For a long moment, she just looked at it. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Marcus, it's Dalia. She took a breath. I need to meet with you tomorrow. I have something you need to see. What kind of something? The kind that changes everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Same place as always? Same place. I'll be there. Dalia ended the call and looked at the envelope again. Tomorrow, she would begin. Tonight, she would rest. She had earned that much. The next morning, Dalia woke before dawn. She showered, dressed, and ate breakfast. The same routine she had followed for 12 years. The same discipline that had carried her through the worst moments of her career. At 8 o'clock, she picked up the envelope and walked out the door. The future was waiting, and she was ready to face it.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.